I knew the morning would get weird the second I heard the knock. Not the polite kind neighbors use when they want to borrow sugar or complain about a noisy leaf blower. This was the kind of pounding that says someone believes they own not only your house but also your bones. I opened the door to see Karen, our neighborhood's self-appointed guardian of community standards, wearing a neon clipboard like it was a police badge. Behind her, her teenage son, Trevor, stood with arms crossed, star. "Your gate," she said without a hello. "It's locked." "Yes," I replied. "That's what gates do. They lock." I smiled like someone who had won a debate before it started. "That gate separates my son from his best friend," she snapped. "They walk through your driveway every day to get to school. You've cut off public access." I looked at my driveway, the one I paid for, shoveled, pressure-washed, resealed, and maintained. The one that was most definitely not a public sidewalk. Right. About that. My security camera saw a group of kids opening my garage fridge last week and raiding my sodas. So now the gate stays locked. Trevor gasped dramatically, like I'd confessed to drowning puppies. "We were thirsty," he said. "You owe us access." "No," I answered. "I owe you nothing but a wave from across the street if you're polite enough to wave first." Karen's nostrils flared like she smelled rule-breaking. "We'll see how the HOA feels about this." "Our HOA doesn't govern property access," I said. I checked. Her eyes flickered with panic for a single moment before she recovered. "Then we'll take another route." I shut the door before she could find one. By noon, I saw her in front of my house again, taking pictures of the gate with dramatic angles like a budget crime scene photographer. Every few minutes, she'd shout something to Trevor about how injustice would not win. He'd nod intensely while scrolling TikTok. I tried to ignore her until a police cruiser rolled up. Of course, the officer stepped out and Karen marched to him like she'd called for backup in a hostage situation. "That man has illegally imprisoned neighborhood children," she declared, pointing at me as if revealing a supervillain. The officer blinked slowly, trying to reboot his brain. "Ma'am, could you clarify?" She pushed her phone into his face. A shaky video of Trevor rattling the gate played on the screen. "Look. He trapped him. He's holding my son hostage." Trevor chimed in. "I couldn't get out for like 2 minutes." I stepped outside, holding a cup of coffee like this was a sitcom episode, and I was the only one aware of the cameras. "Officer, the child was never on my property." He was outside the gate, shaking it for sympathy points. The officer sighed, because his day was already too long. "Ma'am, locked gates are legal." Karen gasped like he'd betrayed the Geneva Conventions. "You're on his side?" "I'm on the side of reality," he replied, returning to his car without another word. Karen stood shaking in silence until the cruiser drove away. Then she turned to me, her voice low and trembling with righteousness. "If something happens to my Trevor because of your selfish lock, it will be on your conscience." I decided she meant stubbed toes or mild emotional discomfort. The next escalation happened Saturday morning. I woke to pounding again, but this time it was metal on metal. I threw open the blinds to see Trevor trying to climb the gate like a badly coordinated koala while Karen filmed. He slipped, fell into my recycling bin, and shouted. He pushed me. I wasn't even outside. Karen shrieked, "Call 911. He's assaulting my son." I walked out onto the porch with my hands raised, just to add to the performance. And how did I accomplish this violent act? Jedi telekinesis. They ignored me as Karen pulled out her phone and dialed. I listened as she breathlessly explained to the emergency dispatcher that I had kidnapped her son, which is a bold accusation to throw around on speakerphone. I interrupted. "He's literally lying in my recycling bin of his own free will." Karen paused her theatrics to hiss at me, "You locked him in." "He's outside the gate," I pointed out. Trevor scrambled up, clutching his elbow. I could have died. From a recycling bin. A second police cruiser arrived. The officer, a different one this time, but carrying the same exhausted expression, stepped out. "What exactly is the emergency?" "My son tried to escape," Karen wailed, pointing at me again. "He was trying to get away and this man trapped him." The officer glanced at the closed gate. "So he voluntarily tried to climb onto private property and fell?" "He is traumatized," Karen declared. Trevor nodded weakly, milking the moment like an Oscar contender. The officer turned to me. "Do you want to press trespassing charges?" Karen's jaw dropped. "How dare you!" she screamed at him. "No," I said calmly. "I just want my property respected." The officer left. Karen and Trevor left. Peace briefly returned like a shy cat. Until the next morning. I came outside to find a giant laminated notice taped to the gate. It read, "Community Access Zone. Gate must remain unlocked between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. by order of public necessity. Signed, Karen, Acting HOA Vice President." Acting. The word did a lot of heavy lifting there. I removed the notice, shredded it, and threw it in the very same recycling bin Trevor had used as a crash pad. Then I locked the gate again because I enjoy basic security. Later that afternoon, Karen returned with witnesses. 2 other neighbors and a man holding a binder who introduced himself as Jerry from the HOA board. Karen stood proudly next to him like she'd captured Bigfoot. Jerry cleared his throat. "There have been complaints." "I bet," I said. He continued, "It's about your gate being locked. It allegedly restricts community access." "Jerry," I said, "that's my driveway." He flipped through the binder, confused but determined. "Yes, but people use it. And now they won't," I answered. Karen jumped in. "This is a tight-knit community. We have traditions. Our children walk together." Trevor nodded like he'd survived a historic civil rights battle. I leaned in. "Your tradition is trespassing." Jerry stammered. "Well, we could consider a compromise, maybe a sign-in sheet?" I laughed. Out loud. "You want people to sign a log to walk through my property?" Karen interrupted, temporarily. "Until we establish permanent easement." There it was. The real goal. A legal right to always use my property. "No," I said. "Not happening." Karen's eyes flashed like she'd just lost a chess move she thought was checkmate. She pointed at the gate with a trembling finger. "You're making a terrible enemy." But I already knew she was planning her next nuclear option. And I knew it involved phones, sirens, and the word kidnapping thrown around like confetti at a clown parade. Soon she would drag everyone into her imagined emergency war. Karen did not wait long to reload her chaos cannons. The very next day, I caught her at the gate again, but this time she wasn't alone. A white van sat idling in the street, plastered in decals for a local security system installer. The tech looked confused as Karen waved a piece of paper in his face with the passion of an unhinged courtroom drama actor. I stepped outside, coffee mug in hand like a shield. "There he is!" Karen shouted triumphantly. "The man obstructing community access." The tech raised a hand. Hi. "So, do you want us to remove this lock?" She said the HOA approved it. I smiled patiently. "That lock is mine. On my gate. Protecting my property." Then I looked at Karen. "You falsified approval?" She clutched the paper to her chest. "Children's safety is at risk. This is an emergency measure." The tech backed away, sensing he'd wandered into someone's personal soap opera. "Yeah, I'm going to call my boss," he mumbled before retreating into his van. Karen lunged for the gate, rattling it like she expected it to give way through intimidation alone. Trevor filmed everything, narrating like a teen reporter documenting a war zone. Day 4 of the hostage situation. The captor refuses entry. I walked closer, and Trevor scrambled away as if my shadow carried legal consequences. Karen pointed a perfectly manicured nail into my face. "You cannot keep children trapped behind this gate forever." "There are no children behind it," I said slowly. "There never have been." Trevor widened his eyes. "Because you scared them off." Before I could answer, a third voice chimed in. Everybody stop. It was Principal Ellis, from the local middle school. She wore the expression of someone who had been begged to intervene during peak chaos hour. She marched up to the gate and glared at Karen. I received 16 emails from you this morning, Ellis said. You claimed students were being barricaded on private land. Karen pointed at me like she finally had an ally. Yes. Thank goodness you're here. He's restricting safe routes to school. Ellis turned to me. Is this your property? Yes, I replied. And that gate is fully on your property? Correct. And it has been here since you bought the house? Longer, I said. The old owner installed it. She nodded, then turned back to Karen. So this is a non-issue. Please refrain from filling my inbox with panic. Karen sputtered. But the children. The children have perfectly fine sidewalks, Ellis said. Sidewalks that are not on this man's driveway. Trevor looked betrayed by the entire educational system. Karen tried one last angle. He put cameras. Cameras on children. I pointed to the posted sign. Security cameras in use. Ellis sighed. Every house here has cameras. Karen's face crumpled like a poorly made origami crane. Ellis left. The security tech left. Trevor stormed home dramatically, filming himself like a tragic hero. Karen stared at me with eyes that promised she wasn't finished. And she wasn't. That evening, as dusk took the street and porch lights flicked on like a synchronized light show, I heard arguing next door. Karen's voice, loud and desperate, leaked through the air like a bad radio channel. He has no right. Trevor deserves freedom. We have to escalate. I grinned. The long game was always my favorite game. The very next morning, Escalation arrived. A fire truck. A real one. Lights flashing, sirens off, but definitely not here for a friendly tour. Firefighters hopped off, yanking gear like they'd trained for this moment. Karen sprinted toward them, waving her arms wildly. There are minors trapped behind that gate, she shrieked. They might be starving. I watched from my porch, sipping tea this time, just for variety. The fire captain approached. Sir, are there children locked inside your property? No, I answered. Feel free to look. The only living things past this gate are squirrels and my hydrangeas. Karen gasped like I'd insulted her entire bloodline. He's lying. They're hiding. They must be freed. One firefighter peeked over the gate. Looks empty, he said, bored. The captain turned to Karen. Ma'am, please stop filing false emergency claims. Karen grabbed Trevor's shoulders and shouted toward the firefighters. They threatened him. He barely escaped. He knows the horrors. Trevor nodded solemnly like a war survivor recounting trauma. The captain gave them a look that said he needed a new job and climbed back into the fire truck. They left. Karen screamed after them, "This isn't over." I genuinely considered baking cookies for the firehouse as thanks. The more her plans failed, the more desperate she became. 3 days of silence passed. It was the kind of silence that feels like a calm before a tornado. I upgraded my cameras and waited. On Friday night, the storm hit. I was jolted awake by sirens. Not fire this time. Multiple police cars swarmed the street, red and blue lights painting every house like a rave. Officers stepped out in tactical gear. One carried a battering ram. They approached my gate laser-focused. Karen and Trevor stood behind them, trembling with a performance anxiety only pathological lying can induce. An officer shouted, "Step away from the house. We have reports of minors in danger." Karen whispered loudly to Trevor, "This is it. They're finally rescuing them." I walked out calmly, hands visible, speaking before someone accidentally turned my hydrangeas into confetti. "Officer, you've been misinformed. There are no children here. At all." A negotiator-looking officer approached. "We received a kidnapping report. 3 minors reportedly trapped behind a locked barrier and possibly injured." My eyebrows rose. 3? We'd gone from one imaginary kid to a whole trio. I unlocked the gate slowly and invited them in. Karen shrieked, "Don't go in. He'll ambush you." The officers ignored her and swept the property. They searched my yard, my porch, even behind my shed where a raccoon stared at them like they'd interrupted his dinner. When the raccoon was the most suspicious living creature around, they returned to me. "Nothing here," one officer confirmed. Karen pushed forward. "You're missing the secret basement." "I don't have a basement," I said. She shouted with pure desperation, "He buried it." The officers shared a look that said they probably wouldn't put this call in the official report because they didn't want paperwork. Their sergeant turned to Karen. "False kidnapping reports are a criminal offense," he said. "You are done tonight." Karen tried to speak, but the sergeant raised a hand. "We'll be informing the HOA. If you call emergency services again for anything involving this man or his gate, you will be charged." Trevor whimpered, But, he locks the gate." The sergeant didn't respond. The officers rolled out. Peace returned, but this peace felt different. It wasn't quiet. It was plotting. Karen had crossed the line where sane people stop. She had reached the threshold where revenge becomes a craft. And I knew she had one final escalation left, buried deep in her warped sense of justice. I just didn't yet know which nightmare she'd choose. But I was ready. I thought after the police warning, Karen would at least take a week off from her community crusader delusions. But no. The next morning, she was already pacing her driveway with a walkie-talkie, whispering into it like she was coordinating a tactical raid. Trevor stood next to her wearing a bike helmet and what looked suspiciously like elbow pads, preparing for battle. I watched through the blinds while brushing my teeth, wondering if caffeine alone could sustain my patience for another day. This woman was a renewable source of chaos, and she woke up early to produce it. What came next was a new level of theatrical genius. Karen printed hundreds of flyers claiming I was a danger to children. These flyers included a distorted photo of me mid-blink and a headline straight from tabloid hell: "Local man imprisons kids." Beneath it, "Beware of locked gate." Her footnotes blamed me for everything from delayed school bus arrivals to emotional trauma. She stuck them on mailboxes, telephone poles, and even the stop sign at the end of the street like public announcements for a coming apocalypse. I peeled one off my own mailbox. Trevor rode past and yelled, "The community knows the truth now." He wobbled dramatically, almost crashed, then sped off like a triumphant freedom fighter. I wondered if he practiced these exits in the mirror. That evening, the HOA called an emergency meeting. The clubhouse was packed with neighbors murmuring like they'd come to witness a scandal with free refreshments. Jerry from the HOA board stood in front, sweating, clutching his binder like it might shield him from chaos. Karen rushed to the front. "This man endangers our children's safety," she announced, pacing like a theater actor. "His gate is a trap. It obstructs the peace and freedom we value." Some clapped weakly. Others looked confused. Jerry asked me to speak. I approached calmly, because someone had to be the adult in the room. "My gate is locked because kids trespassed and stole from my garage. I'm not a public park. I own my driveway." Karen interrupted, "So you admit to holding them hostage?" "No," I replied. "I admit to owning things. It's very normal behavior." A neighbor raised a hand. "Are you kidnapping anyone?" I said, "Only pizza delivery discount codes." A few laughed. Karen glared so hard I thought she might vaporize me. The meeting dissolved without a vote, mostly because nobody knew what they were voting on. Karen left muttering about justice and unfinished battles. The next day, code enforcement knocked. The inspector looked bored already. "Neighbor reported your gate blocks a walkway," he said. "There has never been a walkway," I answered, pointing at the perfectly normal driveway. He nodded like he had already guessed that. He took one photo, apologized for the waste of time, and left. Karen watched from behind her blinds, then slammed them shut like I'd orchestrated a government conspiracy. 2 mornings later, a group of children with bikes gathered outside the gate. Karen stood behind them like a revolutionary commander. "You have the right to walk where you wish," she shouted. Trevor raised a tiny megaphone and yelled, "Power to the Pathfinders!" I opened my window. "There's a sidewalk 30 feet away." Karen yelled back, "Sidewalks are for sheep." The children looked at the sidewalk like it had betrayed them. Then a dog barked nearby and they scattered, abandoning their cause instantly. Trevor filmed the whole disaster like it was a documentary destined for Sundance. That night, silence settled again. When Karen was quiet, she was planning. The next morning, a reporter appeared. Microphone. Cameraman. News van. I stepped outside to face my unexpected fame. "Reports say your gate prevents children from safely traveling," the reporter said. "I love safety," I replied. "That's why the gate is locked. Because trespassing is dangerous." Karen burst into the shot with Trevor, pushing him forward like evidence. "This is the victim," she declared. "He was trapped, restricted, nearly starved." "How long were you trapped?" the reporter asked. "Like 2 minutes," Trevor mumbled. 3, Karen corrected, trying to inflate the suffering. The cameraman lowered the camera a little. Even reality television has standards. The segment aired that night with the headline, "Neighborhood Dispute Over Locked Gate." Karen's dramatic accusations were edited down to 5 seconds of nonsense. The rest made her look like a bored suburban vigilante. The next day, Trevor knocked on the gate. Not dramatic this time. Nervous. "My mom says she's going to break the lock tonight," he whispered. "She bought tools and says this time everyone will be grateful." So that was her plan. I thanked him and told him to stay away from my property. He looked relieved and pedaled away fast. That night, I set up a motion alarm and a camera. I waited in the dark living room. Midnight passed. Then 1. Then 2. Finally, footsteps. The gate clanged softly. Metal tools scraped. Karen hissed, "Hurry, Trevor." Trevor whimpered, "I don't want to get arrested." "No one gets arrested for heroes," she whispered. The moment she snapped the blade over the lock, the alarm blared. Floodlights lit the driveway like a spotlight on a criminal. Trevor dropped the bolt cutters and ran so fast he left his helmet behind. Karen stood frozen, trapped in the glow of her own righteousness. "It's just a lock," she yelled. "It's mine," I answered. She ran, leaving behind her weapon of choice. Neighbors mostly stayed out of it but watched closely, whispering about everything at night. I would send the footage to police in the morning. And this time, they would not be patient or amused. But Karen didn't fear consequences. She believed she was the defender of justice. And people convinced they're righteous are the most dangerous. Kidnapping wasn't dramatic enough anymore. Next, she would insist I was something far worse. A predator. I expected consequences to finally arrive after the midnight bolt cutter stunt, but Karen reacted like a shark that smelled blood. The very next morning, I stepped outside to find a handwritten sign zip-tied to my gate. It read, "Warning, predator lives here." The word predator was underlined several times, as if the ink alone could summon a mob. My stomach twisted with anger, but I reminded myself to stay calm. Emotional restraint was my superpower in this absurd war. I removed the sign, tossed it in the garage, and returned inside. Not 10 minutes later, Karen placed another one. She wasn't giving up. She'd found her ultimate accusation, the nuclear bomb of suburban smear campaigns. And she was going to keep dropping it until someone listened. The mailman arrived mid-battle. He paused at the gate, holding my letters like they were contaminated. "Everything okay here?" he asked, eyes flicking from the sign to me as though he was deciding whether to run. I gestured to the now empty gate where the sign had hung. "My neighbor is committed to creative fiction," I said. Karen overheard and sprinted over, clutching another sign as if ready to replace the fallen one. "Don't let him fool you," she yelled to the mailman. "He locks children inside and watches them." The mailman blinked slowly. "Lady, the gate is locked from the outside." Karen faltered at basic mechanics but recovered fast. He could trap them inside after luring them in. The mailman shook his head and walked away. Karen slapped her new sign on the gate triumphantly, convinced she had won the exchange. I removed it again. We repeated the loop 3 more times until she ran out of zip ties and steam. Later that afternoon, 2 police cruisers arrived. Officers stepped out with the familiar exasperation of men who knew the address before reading the call notes. Karen rushed to them, breathless, dramatic, pointing at me as if she had finally nailed the villain. She insisted I was a risk to children, that Trevor had narrowly escaped my clutches, that the locked gate was part of a sick plan. The officers listened, one writing notes, the other trying not to laugh. When they spoke to me, they asked a single question. "Do you have any footage of her calling you a predator?" "Oh, did I?" I pulled up last night's video, where the floodlights captured Karen yelling about crimes I definitely did not commit while wielding illegal bolt cutters. The officers watched, nodded, and returned to her. The look on her face when they informed her she would be receiving charges for vandalism and false reporting was priceless, a blend of shock and indignation like justice was personally insulting her. She screamed after them as they left, "You're protecting a monster." The entire street heard. Trevor filmed it all from the sidewalk with wide, worried eyes. The charges should have been the final chapter. A normal person would have backed down. Karen was not a normal person. She was powered by a dangerous cocktail of entitlement and certainty. If the police wouldn't stop me, she would find someone who would. That evening, 3 unfamiliar cars pulled up. Out stepped a group of strangers holding pamphlets and wearing judgmental expressions. Karen waved them over like she was giving a guided tour. "This is the house," she announced. "He's been seen watching children through a locked gate." They whispered to each other, staring at my front door as though evil might poke its head out and ask if anyone wanted candy. I stepped outside to clear the air, but that only made it worse. One woman gasped and clutched her child. Karen grinned like she'd uncovered the truth. I wanted to yell, explain, defend my basic humanity, but reason wasn't invited to this investigation. The group eventually dispersed, promising to inform the community. Karen called after them, "We won't stop until he pays." I locked the door and breathed slowly, reminding myself not to let rage dictate my next move. The next day, workmen arrived. 2 men in safety vests, a truck loaded with fencing tools. Karen approached them like a general ordering troops into formation. They measured the area around the gate as if planning major construction. I walked out to intercept. "Can I help you?" The lead worker showed a permit, claiming they'd been instructed by the HOA to remove any security obstructions. Karen smirked like she'd pulled off a legal miracle. I read the document. It was a printed form filled in with handwriting suspiciously similar to Karen's, featuring Jerry's name spelled wrong twice. I recorded everything on camera as I said, "Touch that gate and you'll be personally liable for destruction of private property." The workers glanced at Karen, then at the cameras, then left. Karen yelled, "Cowards," after them. She didn't like when her imaginary authority was questioned. The calm that followed wasn't real calm. It was the heavy silence before a storm that chooses violence. I upgraded motion sensors again, triple-checked my locks, and waited. At 3:17 a.m., alarms went off. I checked my cameras. Karen was climbing the gate. Not rattling it, not screaming at it, climbing it. Trevor stood nearby, wringing his hands. "Mom, this is crazy," he whispered. She hissed back, "He must pay. Everyone must know." She reached the top, dropped down inside my property, and began placing signs all over my yard. She moved like a fever dream on a mission. One sign landed right against my front door, "Danger, he watches children." Another was staked next to my porch, "Report this monster." She muttered to herself like she was already testifying in court. I stepped out quietly and stood behind her. "You're trespassing," I said. She didn't turn, she spun. Her eyes wild, hair tangled, adrenaline pumping. "I'm rescuing children from you," she growled. I pointed around. "There are no children here." She jabbed a finger at the gate. Because you keep them locked away. You think you can hide your sins behind fences. She lunged to grab another sign. I blocked her path, calm only on the outside. Trevor began to cry. The kind of soft, terrified crying that finally tells the truth. "Mom, we have to go," he begged. "Please." For the first time, she hesitated. I said nothing, but I knew this was my moment. I turned to Trevor, speaking only loud enough for her to hear. "You don't have to be part of this. It's not your fight." Trevor stared at his mother with an expression I'd never seen from him, fear mixed with disbelief. "Mom," he whispered, "you're scaring me." That hit her harder than any police warning ever could. She froze. Her breathing slowed. She looked around at the signs, the floodlights, my cameras, her son's trembling hands. A crack formed in her righteous shield. She grabbed Trevor's arm and climbed back over the gate, clumsy and shaky. The signs remained scattered across my yard like debris from a moral explosion. She didn't speak a word as they walked home. But her silence finally sounded like defeat. Things should have ended right there. But people like Karen don't truly lose. They retreat, regroup, and search for bigger allies. And the group she planned to bring in next didn't send pamphlets. They showed up with flashing lights and a warrant. I woke up to pounding again, but this time it was official. The sun wasn't even up when red and blue lights washed over my living room walls. 3 police cars, a child services van, and an unmarked vehicle filled the street like a crime drama production. I stepped to the window, and already knew who orchestrated this. Karen stood at the edge of my driveway, hands clasped like she was unveiling a triumph. Trevor lingered behind her, pale and silent. This was not just her next escalation. This was her endgame. She looked like someone who believed the universe had finally rewarded her bravery. She believed justice had arrived wearing tactical vests and carrying clipboard. She thought she had finally found the allies who would listen. I opened the door before they could knock. A stern woman with a clipboard approached first, backed by 2 officers and a detective. She spoke like she had rehearsed every word. "We have received reports that you are unlawfully detaining minors on your property and may be endangering children in the neighborhood. We are required to investigate." Karen gasped dramatically behind them. "He locks the gate so they can't escape," she shouted. "He films them. He watches them. He is obsessed." The woman ignored her for the moment, focusing on me. "May we enter?" I nodded. "Please do." As they entered my home, Karen stood outside shouting the allegations again and again, each retelling growing darker, more twisted. Trevor tugged her arm, begging her to stop, but she shook him off like a mosquito. Inside, the detective surveyed my living room as if expecting to find chains, cages, or school backpacks filled with ransom note. I gestured to the house. "Feel free to search everywhere. You will find nothing but dust and sanity, and possibly snack." They didn't laugh. They walked through every room with cameras rolling. The stern woman asked pointed questions. "Do you spend time with neighborhood minors?" "No." "Do you invite children onto your property?" "Never." "Do you restrict access to the gate?" "Yes, because it is my property." "Has anyone ever been held inside against their will?" "Not even a stray cat." They checked closets, the garage, the attic. The detective opened my refrigerator dramatically, as if expecting a missing child behind the lettuce. When they finally reached the backyard, they inspected the gate closely, studying the lock like it held clues. The detective finally asked the big question. "Do you have cameras on the gate?" "Yes," I replied. "May we review the footage?" "Absolutely." I pulled up the video archive. They saw Trevor climbing, falling, pretending to be trapped. They saw Karen rattling the gate like she was auditioning for a disaster movie. They saw her trespassing, planting signs, screaming accusations. They saw the bolt cutters. They saw everything. The detective sighed with relief or frustration, I couldn't tell. The stern woman closed her folder. "There is no evidence of wrongdoing here." Karen must have sensed their tone shift because she rushed toward the gate. She started yelling through the bars. "You don't understand. He hides the proof. He erased the videos. Detective, he is manipulating you. Trevor grabbed her sleeve. Mom, stop. Please. For the 100th time, she ignored him. She turned to the other neighbors gathering outside and shouted. He is dangerous. He will come for your kids next. One officer approached her calmly. Ma'am, the investigation is complete. She refused to accept the words. She kicked the gate and screamed. You're failing your duty. Protect the children. The stern woman motioned for an officer. They spoke quietly for a moment before handcuffs appeared. Karen froze in disbelief. What are you doing? Arresting him. But they weren't looking at me. The officer stepped toward her. Karen Thompson, you are being detained for filing multiple false child endangerment reports and trespassing. Her scream pierced the cold morning as they took hold of her arms. This was no performance. This was panic. Real fear. The street fell silent except for her shouting about conspiracies. Trevor broke. He ran to me instead of following his mother. His voice shook as he spoke. I'm sorry. She thinks she's protecting me. She keeps saying the world is trying to take me away. She won't listen to anyone. He looked toward the police, placing his mother in handcuffs as she kicked and shrieked about conspiracies. She was no longer performing. She was lost inside her own story. And now everyone could see it. They placed Karen in the back of the cruiser. Trevor's shoulders sagged with relief and guilt tangled together. The officers said child services would speak to him, but he wasn't in danger. He just needed someone sensible to talk to. I told him I was sorry he had been dragged into this. He nodded, eyes wet, and whispered a thank you for not yelling at him when things got bad. It struck me then that Trevor wasn't a villain at all. He was a scared kid caught in a lie that grew teeth. The police left. The neighbors dispersed. The morning sun finally climbed high enough to burn away the chaos from the night. I walked around my yard gathering Karen signs. I pulled the last one off the bushes. It read in angry red marker, "Locking gates hides evil." I stared at it for a long moment before tossing it into the garbage where it belonged. It was over, I told myself. But peace didn't come. Not that day, not the next. The gate remained locked, but now the silence behind it felt heavier. People avoided eye contact. Some saw me as the victim of a deranged neighbor. Others remembered the signs and wondered if they missed something. Rumors echo longer than truth. Trevor stayed with relatives for a while. I saw him leave with a suitcase the next morning, wiping tears when he thought no one could see. I spent the next week trying to return to normal. Work, chores, morning coffee, the gate standing steady. Then the HOA sent a letter. Despite recent events, the board is concerned about ongoing tension caused by the locked gate. They kindly suggested I remove it for community harmony. I laughed when I read it, out loud, alone. Of all the lessons this neighborhood could learn, they chose none. They wanted the problem to vanish rather than admit it never existed. They were still afraid of conflict, afraid of confrontation, afraid of acknowledging that one of their own had turned a rumor into a weapon. I drafted a response. Respectfully, no. The gate stays. The lock stays. My property stays mine. I was done compromising. I was done pretending entitlement was a misunderstanding. I mailed the letter, stood behind the gate, and waited for the final repercussions. Karen might have left in a police car, but the damage she caused was still out there, whispered in driveways and inside minivans. And rumors always look for a new spark. Days passed without any shouting or sirens, but peace felt artificial, brittle like a window ready to crack. Trevor rode his bike past once, paused by the gate, then kept going. A few neighbors walked by slower than usual, curiosity drawing their eyes toward me as if expecting a sequel. And in the quiet, I realized Karen's crusade had planted something far worse than fear. It had planted doubt. Doubt doesn't need evidence. Doubt just needs a pause, a corner glance, a lowered voice. Doubt can turn a locked gate into a prison. Doubt was still circling, searching for a fresh excuse to break everything again. The neighborhood returned to a strange quiet after Karen's arrest, the kind of quiet that comes with people pretending nothing ever happened while keeping one eye open. I tried to live normally. I watered the hydrangeas. I waved at the mailman. I walked to my car without looking around like a fugitive. But every step reminded me that fear had taken root here, not mine, but theirs. People avoided talking about Karen, avoided mentioning the sirens or the allegations or the way she shouted about protecting children from a non-existent villain. They pretended it was simply one unusual incident, a hiccup in an otherwise boring suburban routine. No one wanted to admit that paranoia had walked among us in the shape of a neighbor they once admired. The HOA did not hold another meeting. Jerry avoided my gaze whenever he drove by, like eye contact might reveal he ever believed a single one of Karen's lies. Trevor returned to school eventually, but he walked on the sidewalk. When he passed the gate, he kept his head down, as though acknowledging me would reopen old wounds. I didn't blame him. A week passed before the next disturbance. A white envelope appeared in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a neatly folded letter typed in a font that tried too hard to be friendly. It read, "We know what you did. Remove the gate or we expose everything." There was no signature, no accusations spelled out. Just a threat fueled by ignorance and paranoia. I stared at it, not angry this time, just tired. Doubt had found its disciples. I installed another camera. Late one evening, I saw flashlights flickering outside. Two figures stood at the gate, whispering as they examined the lock. They didn't try to break it. They took photos, then hurried away like kids daring each other to poke a sleeping lion. The next morning, a new rumor spread. I was preparing to fortify the property further. Neighbors wondered if I was planning a bunker, or surveillance towers, or high walls to keep the world out. The absurdity was exhausting. Finally, the police report on Karen became public record. False reporting. Trespassing. Defamation investigation pending. One neighbor, Mrs. Clark, brought me cookies as an apology for believing the worst. She said quietly, "We just didn't know who to trust." I thanked her and didn't mention the stack of other neighbors who never said a word. Fear makes people cowardly in large group. Another envelope arrived. This one handwritten. It said simply, "Sorry." A single word that made the rest of the street feel less hostile. I suspected it was Trevor, but I didn't confirm it. He deserved privacy and space away from his mother's war. Then one afternoon, a moving truck pulled into Karen's driveway. Four men unloaded furniture while Trevor supervised. He waved at me, hesitant but real. I waved back. The house looked smaller without her energy radiating from it. I wondered if she would ever return or if the arrest had finally broken the spell she'd cast over herself. A week later, the house went on the market. A for sale sign stood like a gravestone for a conflict that should never have existed. Everyone hoped it meant the end. But Karen returned. Not in person. In paperwork. A notice arrived informing me that a civil suit had been filed. Karen versus me. The claim: emotional distress, property obstruction, public endangerment, and other nonsense that read like the plot of a poorly funded courtroom drama. She sought damages, legal fees, and the removal of the gate. I laughed again, but this time it hurt. She had found a new battlefield: court. I hired a lawyer. He watched the footage, read the police reports, and shook his head like I was the protagonist in a case study he would lecture about one day. He assured me we would win easily, but lawsuits don't feel like victories. They feel like dragging a corpse uphill while the corpse shouts insults at you. Court came months later. Karen stood before the judge with fire in her eyes and a folder full of delusions. She argued so passionately that I almost admired her dedication to chaos. She spoke of trapped children, psychological torment, her heroic resistance. The judge let her finish, then dismissed the case before my lawyer could even speak. Karen stormed out, swearing she would return with new evidence, new witnesses, new truths. The judge sighed heavily, already imagining the future paperwork. After that collapse, I thought she would vanish from my life forever. But some people don't fade. They echo. The gate became a monument to everything she failed to control. Neighbors began to thank me for keeping it, as if it symbolized victory over madness. Kids walked by with new appreciation for sidewalk. Trevor returned one day without fear in his eyes. He said his mom was in counseling, staying with relatives far away. He said she might get better. I hope so. He deserved a mother who lived in reality, not in a melodrama fueled by imaginary danger. Life slowly settled into something that resembled peace. But sometimes, when I locked the gate each night, I remembered Karen's voice screaming accusations that could have ruined me if the wrong person had believed one lie too quickly. A locked gate had started everything, but the truth had ended it. One ordinary Saturday, Trevor rode up to the gate again. He said he'd moved back into the neighborhood with another relative but wanted to show me something. He pulled out a drawing from his backpack. It was a picture of the gate. On one side, a tiny cartoon version of him smiling. On the other side, me holding a cup of coffee. The caption, "Thanks for keeping me safe." I didn't know what to say, so I nodded and told him the drawing was perfect. The gate was still locked. Not to keep people out, not to trap anything in, but because it was mine. It stood as a reminder that boundaries matter. Some are physical, some are emotional, and some are necessary because the world contains Karens with clipboards and misguided confidence. I checked the cameras one last time before heading inside. The street was calm. No signs, no sirens, no accusations. Just quiet. The honest kind. I shut the door gently, finally believing it was over. The lock clicked behind me, clean and satisfying. Tomorrow, I might even unlock the gate. Maybe not for good. Maybe just long enough to remember that most neighbors are not enemies, and children do not need revolutionary pathways to reach their friends. Maybe just long enough to let a little trust back into the yard. But tonight the lock stays. Not because I fear the world outside, but because I earned the right to control my own space. I glanced once more toward the street before drawing the curtains. A breeze rustled the trees where chaos once lurked. I breathed deeply, allowing the relief to settle. The story that began with a locked gate ended with me finally feeling guarded in the right ways. And if anyone ever asks why I keep my gate closed, I'll tell them the truth. Sometimes protection isn't about danger. It's about dignity and peace. I stayed calm always.